The helicopter blades hammered against the Afghan sky like God's own percussion section, each rotation kicking up clouds of sand that turned the January sun into a hazy orange disk. Inside the Combat Support Hospital at Kandahar Airfield, Specialist Kira Brennan didn't hear the rotors anymore. After 11 months in country, the sound had become as natural as breathing. What she heard now were screams. 5 wounded soldiers on gurneys, blood pooling beneath sterile sheets, and one of them, Lance Corporal Hayes, was drowning in his own chest cavity. The sucking sound of a punctured lung filled the trauma bay like a terrible whisper. 23 years old, and Kira had already learned that death had a sound. This was it. Her hands moved before her mind caught up, gloves snapping on, scissors cutting through Hayes' uniform. The fabric fell away to reveal a chest that rose on one side and collapsed on the other. Tension pneumothorax. She had maybe 2 minutes before his heart stopped from the pressure. "Brennan!" The voice cut through chaos like a blade through silk. Commander Garrett Hawthorne stood at the edge of the bay, his SEAL instructor uniform somehow immaculate despite the dust storm outside. "Talk to me." Kira's voice came out steady, clinical, trained. "Left-sided tension pneumothorax. Need immediate needle decompression, sir." "Then do it." Her hands found the landmarks. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. The 14-gauge catheter felt enormous in her fingers. Outside, mortars landed somewhere in the distance. Taliban probing the perimeter. The lights flickered once. "Block it out," Hawthorne said quietly. "All of it. The noise, the fear. Focus on the breath sounds." She pushed the needle through skin, through muscle, through the pleural space. The hiss of escaping air sounded like salvation. Hayes' oxygen saturation climbed. 84%, 89, 94. Then his heart stopped. The monitor flatlined. That single tone that every combat medic knows in their nightmares. Kira didn't freeze. Her training wouldn't let her. Hands interlaced, heel of palm on sternum, 2 inches deep, 100 compressions per minute. She counted in her head because numbers were solid things. Real things. Things that kept the universe from flying apart. 15 seconds. 30. 45. The line jumped. One beat, then another. Regular rhythm returning like a song remembered. Hayes gasped. His eyes opened, confused and terrified and alive. Kira stepped back, her hands shaking now that it was over. Hawthorne moved beside her, his presence solid as granite. "You just saved his life under the worst conditions imaginable," he said. "Remember this feeling. You'll need it someday." That night, after the adrenaline crash, after the debriefing, after the other 4 wounded had been stabilized and evacuated, Hawthorne found Kira in the corridor outside the trauma bay. She sat against the concrete wall, still in her blood-stained uniform, staring at nothing. He sat down beside her without asking. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You hesitated," he finally said. "Yes, sir." "For how long?" 2 seconds, maybe 3. That's 2 seconds less than most medics would have hesitated. And Hayes is breathing because of those 3 seconds. He pulled something from his pocket, a laminated card with a diagram. "I'm going to teach you something. Protocol from Tier 1 medical operations. We use it when communication is compromised, when the enemy is close, when a medic needs immediate backup and radio silence is mandatory." He demonstrated. 2 fingers to the radial pulse point on his wrist. A simple gesture that looked like checking your own heartbeat. "This signal means, I recognize you. I need help. I trust you." Any special operations medical personnel will understand it instantly. It saved lives when words couldn't. Kira studied the gesture, committed it to memory. "When would I ever use this stateside, sir?" Hawthorne's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing his weathered face. "Pray you never have to. But if you do, if you're in a situation where everything is going wrong, and you need someone to understand that you need backup right now, this signal cuts through everything else." He stood, offered her a hand up. Any Tier 1 operator will recognize it, including me. She took his hand, got to her feet, looked at the diagram again.
Thank you, sir.
Don't thank me, just remember it. 5 years later, in a very different kind of battlefield, she would. St. Mary's Hospital in Denver wore its prestige like armor. Glass and steel architecture, wall-mounted screens displaying patient metrics in real time. Everything designed to project cutting-edge medical excellence. But at 2 in the morning, when the fluorescent lights hummed their insect song and the hallways smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation, the shine wore thin. It was March 2026, 5 years after Kandahar. Kira Brennan moved through those hallways with the same efficient stride she'd used in combat zones. 8 months back from deployment, 8 months trying to convince herself that civilian nursing was just combat medicine at a different tempo. 8 months failing at that particular lie. Her scrubs were faded from too many washings, her sneakers developing holes she couldn't afford to replace. The medical bag slung over her shoulder carried the same supplies it had carried in Afghanistan, patched with duct tape in 3 places. She earned $32 an hour, which sounded almost livable until you factored in the $97,000 in student loans the GI Bill hadn't covered. Until you counted the rent and utilities and the phone calls from Pittsburgh, where her mother's voice got a little weaker every week. Margaret Brennan, Maggie to her friends. Factory worker for 33 years, single mother for 15 of them, proud Irish American from a neighborhood where pride was sometimes all you had. Heart failure, congestive, progressive. The cardiologist's words at her last appointment had been clinically precise and utterly devastating. She needs a valve replacement within 6 weeks, or the damage becomes irreversible. Cost, $145,000. Insurance response, pre-existing condition, claim denied. Kiara's response, work more shifts, sleep less, send 70% of every paycheck home, live on ramen noodles and hope, survive. She was very good at surviving. The emergency call came at 11:47 p.m. Trauma in the surgical wing. All available nurses to OR4. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her combat conditioning still strong despite the months of relative peace. OR4 smelled of blood and antiseptic, the 2 cents of her professional life. The patient on the table was Howard Griggs, 68 years old, Korean War veteran, post-operative day 3 from gallbladder surgery, routine procedure. Should have been home yesterday, but Griggs's vitals were deteriorating in ways that made Kira's combat-trained instincts scream warnings. Blood pressure, 90/55 and dropping. Heart rate, 122 and climbing. Temperature, 103.8. Lactate levels elevated. White blood cell count through the ceiling. She'd seen these patterns before. Kandahar, forward surgical positions. Soldiers 3 days post-injury, suddenly crashing because infection had been brewing beneath the surface. Invisible until it exploded. Dr. Roland Ashford stood at the head of the bed, reviewing charts with the methodical precision of a man who'd performed this dance 10,000 times. He was 62, silver-haired, with the posture of someone who'd spent time in uniform and never quite left it behind. His white coat was crisp as a dress uniform. The medals from Gulf War service lined his office wall like sentries. "Sir," Kira kept her voice neutral, professional. "His lactate is 4.2, blood pressure falling. I think we're looking at sepsis from the surgical site." Ashford glanced at the monitors, then at her, then back at the monitors. "I performed the surgery personally, Nurse Brennan. The procedure was flawless. His numbers are within acceptable range for post-operative recovery. With respect, doctor, the trend indicates Nurse Brennan." His voice dropped to the tone drill sergeants use when patience has expired. "Step outside, now." She followed him into the corridor. Through the observation window, she could see Griggs on the table, see another nurse adjusting IV lines, see the monitors painting their picture of a system in slow collapse. Ashford closed the door, turned to face her. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades and authority and absolute certainty. I read your file when you were hired. Army Reserve, combat medic, Afghanistan, 2 deployments, impressive service record. He said it like he was reading from a report. But let me be perfectly clear about something. This is not Kandahar. This is not a forward surgical position where you make life or death calls based on instinct and improvisation. This is a civilian hospital. We have protocols. We have procedures. We have a chain of command. Sir, I understand that, but you don't diagnose, Specialist Brennan. That's not your role. You observe, you report, you follow orders. I've been performing surgery since before you were born. I commanded field surgical teams during Desert Storm. I know what sepsis looks like, and this is not it. The words she wanted to say stuck in her throat. The words about pattern recognition, about combat triage principles, about the statistical reality that post-operative infections killed more soldiers than enemy fire in modern warfare. She swallowed them all. Yes, sir. Good. Return to your station. She returned to her station. Watch the monitors. Watch Griggs's numbers continue their slow downward spiral. And at 3:14 a.m., when his blood pressure crashed and his organs began shutting down one by one, when they rushed him to intensive care and pumped him full of broad-spectrum antibiotics, when the sepsis diagnosis became undeniable, Kira was not in the room. The incident report filed the next morning read, post-operative complication, unforeseeable septic response to surgical intervention. Patient stabilized through rapid intervention by Dr. Ashford. No mention of the nurse who'd seen it coming 6 hours earlier. No mention of the doctor who'd ignored her. Kira read the report in the staff break room at 6 a.m., her hands trembling from exhaustion and something darker. Griggs would survive. This time. But she'd seen this pattern before, and patterns were how you predicted the future. That afternoon, after a 4-hour sleep that brought no rest, she returned to the hospital and did something she knew could cost her everything. She logged into the medical records system, searched post-operative complications over the past 18 months, filtered by attending surgeon, Dr. Roland Ashford. 37 surgeries, 9 cases of serious post-operative complications, 4 infections, 3 hemorrhages, 2 deaths. She pulled the hospital-wide statistics for comparison. The average complication rate was 0.8%. Ashford's was 3.4%, more than 4 times the expected number. Revenue generated by Dr. Ashford in fiscal year 2025, $4.2 million. Number of formal complaints filed against Dr. Ashford, 0. Kiera sat in the hospital records room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and understood with perfect clarity that she had just uncovered something that could save lives and destroy her career in equal measure. The evidence was right there, mathematical, undeniable, and completely inadmissible because she'd accessed records outside her authorization, because speaking up would make her the problem, because hospitals protected revenue streams before they protected anyone else. She copied the data to an encrypted drive anyway, slipped it into her pocket, deleted her access logs as best she could, and walked out of that room knowing she'd just crossed a line that you couldn't uncross. Her phone rang that evening. Pittsburgh area code. She answered already knowing, the way you always know when bad news is coming. Kira? Her mother's voice was weak, weaker than last week. Honey, I need you to stay calm. What happened, Mom? I collapsed at work. They called an ambulance. I'm at UPMC right now and the doctors are saying, a pause, the sound of breathing that took too much effort. They're saying I need to get to a specialist, soon. The heart failure is accelerating. Kira closed her eyes, calculated without wanting to. The cost of medical transport from Pittsburgh to Denver, $3,000. The cost of the specialist consultation, $1,200. The cost of the surgery itself, if they could get her approved, $145,000. Her bank account balance, $290. Mom, listen to me. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get you the care you need. Sweetheart, I don't want you destroying yourself for me. Mom, Kira's voice carried the steel of someone who'd held dying soldiers and refused to let them go. I'm going to fix this, I promise. After the call ended, she sat in her studio apartment, 400 square feet, broken heater, view of an alley, and took inventory of her life. A medical bag from Afghanistan, a uniform she'd earned the right to wear, an encrypted drive full of evidence she couldn't use, a mother dying in Pittsburgh, $97,000 in debt, $290 in the bank, and a job she needed desperately, working under a surgeon who was killing patients through negligence. She tried to sleep, failed, watched the ceiling instead and calculated impossible mathematics. How to save her mother, how to save herself, how to save anyone. At 6 a.m., she gave up on sleep, returned to St. Mary's for another shift, smiled at colleagues, said good morning to administrators, performed her duties with the competence that came from years of training. And when nurse manager Evelyn Rutherford pulled her aside at the end of the shift to tell her that Dr. Ashford had requested her specifically for his surgical team, permanently, Kira understood exactly what was happening. He wants you where he can keep an eye on you, Rutherford said quietly. She was 50, career nurse, survivor of 3 decades in hospital politics. You've been asking questions, looking at records. Word gets around. I was just doing research. Kira, Rutherford's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I've been here 28 years. I've seen good nurses try to fight the system before. They always lose. Dr. Ashford is untouchable. Gulf War hero, generates millions in revenue. The board worships him. And if he's killing patients, then you document everything you can. You keep your head down. And when you have enough evidence to go to the state medical board, you do it from a different job in a different city where he can't retaliate. That could take years. Yes, Rutherford's expression carried the weight of every compromise she'd ever made. I'm sorry, but that's how it works. Kira nodded slowly, thanked her for the advice, walked to the parking lot as the March sun climbed over the Denver skyline. She didn't have years. Her mother had weeks. 2 weeks later, at 11:47 p.m., there was something about that particular time, some cosmic joke about history repeating. The trauma alert sounded. Emergency surgery. Multiple injuries. All hands to OR4. The patient was Natalie Whitmore, 19 years old, college sophomore, pre-med student with a 4.0 GPA and a future that stretched bright and infinite, until a drunk driver ran a red light and turned her small sedan into twisted metal. Multiple internal injuries, ruptured spleen, internal hemorrhaging, blood pressure critical. Time mattered in minutes, not hours. Dr. Ashford led the surgical team. Kira was assigned to assist. Through the observation window, she could see Natalie's parents, the Whitmores, whose foundation had donated $6 million for the hospital's pediatric wing, watching with the particular terror of people who just learned that money couldn't protect them from everything. The surgery began at 12:15 a.m. Ashford's hands moved with practiced efficiency, accessing the abdominal cavity, identifying the damaged spleen, beginning the careful work of repair. Kira stood across the table, monitoring vitals, passing instruments, doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept surgeries running. And then she saw it. A bleeder. Small arterial branch at the posterior aspect of the splenic artery. Not massive, but steady. The kind of bleed that could hide behind other tissue, could pump blood into the abdominal cavity slowly enough to go unnoticed until the patient crashed. She'd seen this exact pattern in Kandahar. Shrapnel wounds that looked controlled until they weren't. Doctor, her voice was calm, professional. The posterior arterial branch, I think we have a bleeder. Ashford didn't look up from his work. Suction. Sir, if you look at the Nurse Brennan, I can see what I'm doing. Suction, now. She provided suction. Watch the surgical field. Watch the blood that kept seeping back despite the suction. Watch Natalie's blood pressure on the monitor. 110 over 70. 100 over 65. 95 over 60. Doctor, her pressure is dropping. I can see the monitors. 85 over 55. 80 over 50. The anesthesiologist's voice carried tension. Dr. Ashford, we need to address this bleeding. I am addressing it, but his hands moved to a different area, trying to control hemorrhage from a source he'd identified, missing the one Kira could see clearly because of her angle across the table. 75 over 50, 70 over 45, and then the monitor screamed, flatline. That sound. That terrible sound Kira had last heard in a combat hospital 5 years ago. She's coding! The anesthesiologist started the timer. When a heart stops, you have minutes. 4, maybe 5, before brain damage becomes permanent. Ashford's hands moved faster, still focused on the wrong area. 20 seconds. 30. Kira could see it so clearly. The torn arterial branch. Right there. Pumping blood that should have been feeding organs into empty space. She could clamp it in 5 seconds. One quick reach across the sterile field. One surgical clamp. 5 seconds to save a life. But she was a nurse, not a surgeon. And the chain of command was absolute. 40 seconds. 45. She thought about Howard Griggs, about the 9 patients in Ashford's file, about her mother dying in Pittsburgh, about every moment in her life that had led to this one impossible choice. 50 seconds. Her hand moved. She reached across the sterile field, grabbed a clamp from the instrument tray, identified the bleeding vessel with the pattern recognition she'd learned keeping soldiers alive under mortar fire, and clamped it. The bleeding stopped. Instantly. Completely. Natalie's blood pressure began to climb. 80 over 50. 85 over 55, 90 over 60. The anesthesiologist. Pressure stabilizing, O2 sats improving. We've got her back. 60 seconds. The heart rhythm returned, regular, strong. Dr. Roland Ashford stared at Kira across the operating table. His eyes above the surgical mask carried something between shock and rage. He stripped off his gloves with sharp, violent movements. Dropped them on the floor. You just physically interfered with a surgeon during a live operation, Nurse Brennan. That constitutes assault. Sir, the patient was dying. Get out of my OR. Security. The surgical team stood frozen. The scrub nurses. The anesthesiologist. All witnesses to what had just happened. Kira looked down at Natalie Whitmore. 19 years old. Breathing. Alive. She looked back at Ashford. Yes, sir. Security arrived within 3 minutes. 2 men in hospital uniforms who looked embarrassed to be escorting a nurse out of surgery. They walked her to the administrative offices, sat her in a chair outside a door marked Hospital Counsel. At 1:45 a.m., a lawyer named Morrison entered with a manila folder and an expression that conveyed absolute neutrality. Nurse Brennan, I'm going to make this very brief. Doctor, Ashford has filed a formal complaint alleging physical interference during surgery, violation of sterile protocol, and actions endangering patient safety. You are suspended immediately, effective now, pending investigation. Your badge is deactivated. You are not to contact any hospital staff, enter hospital property, or discuss this matter with anyone. Do you understand? Kira's voice came from somewhere far away. Yes, you'll be notified of the investigation timeline within 72 hours. Surrender your badge. She unclipped the badge, placed it on the table, stood, walked out of the office, down the corridor, past the elevators, down 5 flights of stairs to the parking lot. She sat in her 11-year-old Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been on for 6 months and finally let herself cry. Not for herself, for Natalie Whitmore, whose life she'd saved. For Howard Griggs, whom she hadn't been able to protect. For the 9 other patients in the data. For her mother in Pittsburgh. For every impossible choice that medicine forced on people who just wanted to help. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Natalie Whitmore is stable. Expected full recovery. You should know that. No signature. But someone on that surgical team had wanted her to know. She drove home through Denver streets empty at 2 a.m., climbed the stairs to her studio apartment, sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing bloody scrubs, and pulled out the encrypted drive from her desk drawer. The evidence. 9 cases of malpractice. Statistical patterns that screamed negligence. All of it inadmissible. All of it useless. She copied the drive anyway, made 3 backups, stored them in separate locations, because evidence was hope, even when you didn't know how to use it. The official incident report, filed at 6 a.m. by hospital administration, read, "Emergency surgical intervention on patient Whitmore, N. Post-trauma splenic hemorrhage, controlled through rapid response by Dr. Roland Ashford. Patient stable. Prognosis excellent." 1,500 words of clinical language that erased Kiera Brennan from the story completely. 72 hours after suspension, Kiera Brennan's world had contracted to a series of brutal calculations. Rent due in 48 hours, $1,150. Mother's ICU bills arriving daily, $2,800 per week. Bank account balance, $290. Credit cards maxed at 18,000 combined, interest compounding like a disease. She sat in her studio apartment at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, staring at rejection emails from emergency loan applications. Suspended employee, high debt to income ratio, application denied, application denied, application denied. Her phone lit up. Pittsburgh area code. She answered, already bracing for impact. "Kiera?" Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Honey, the doctors say I need to transfer to Boston. There's a specialist there, only one in the region who can do the procedure I need. But the cost..." "How much, Mom?" $8,500, just for the medical transport and initial deposit. That's before the surgery itself. $8,500. It might as well have been $8 million. "When do you need to go?" "They're saying within the week. After that, the heart failure becomes too advanced for surgical intervention." Kiera looked around her apartment. Laptop worth maybe $300 on resale. iPad with cracked screen, $150. The few pieces of jewelry her grandmother had left her, perhaps $2,000 total. She did the math. Not enough, not even close. "Mom, I'm going to figure this out, I promise." After the call ended, she began selling everything. Posted her electronics online at midnight. By dawn, she had buyers lined up. $2,600 raised by noon. She took the items to a pawn shop for the jewelry, got $1,800, $4,400 total. Then she did something she'd sworn she'd never do. Walked into a payday loan storefront on Colfax Avenue, where the neon sign buzzed and flickered like a dying thing. The woman behind bulletproof glass barely looked at her. "How much?" $5,900, 90-day term. Interest rate? 26%. 26%. Kiera calculated quickly. If she couldn't pay it back in 90 days, the debt would balloon to $7,400, then $9,300, compounding monthly. "I'll need proof of employment. I'm currently between jobs." The woman looked up for the first time, assessed her with practiced cynicism. "Can't help you then." Kiera pulled out her last pay stub from St. Mary's, dated 6 days ago, before the suspension. The woman studied it, made a phone call, came back. "Approved, but if you default, we pursue wage garnishment and asset seizure." "I understand." She signed papers she barely read, took $5,900 in cash. Combined with her savings, she had $8,500, exactly enough. She booked the medical transport flight from Pittsburgh to Boston for the following morning. called her mother back, arranged everything with the efficiency she'd learned in combat, where hesitation killed people. "I'll meet you in Boston, Mom. I'm flying out with you." "Kira, you can't afford. Already booked. I'll see you at the airport." She hung up before her mother could argue. Packed a single bag with her cleanest scrubs, her medical bag from Afghanistan, the encrypted drive with Ashford's malpractice data. Didn't allow herself to think about what came after Boston, about the rent she couldn't pay, about the investigation at St. Mary's, about the nursing license that might be revoked. Survival meant dealing with immediate threats first. Everything else was future problems for a future version of herself. Denver International Airport at 6:15 in the morning was a study in controlled chaos. Kira pushed her mother's wheelchair through Terminal C, navigating around business travelers and families and the eternal security lines. Margaret Brennan sat hunched in the chair, oxygen tank attached, breathing with visible effort. Her face had the gray pallor that Kira had learned to recognize in trauma patients. "Time running out." "You didn't have to come with me," Maggie said for the third time. "Mom, I'm not letting you make this trip alone. You should be at work." Kira didn't have the heart to tell her mother the truth. Not yet. Not when she was this sick. So she lied. "I took leave. It's fine." They reached the gate area, still an hour before boarding. Kira parked the wheelchair near the floor-to-ceiling windows where the morning sun cut through the terminal in golden shafts. She needed coffee, needed food, had eaten nothing but ramen noodles for 4 days straight, saving every dollar. Her medical bag slumped against the wheelchair, worn canvas patched with duct tape. The bag that had traveled with her through Kandahar. She touched it unconsciously, the way soldiers touch talismans. That's when she saw him. 40 feet away, near the departure boards, a man in full Navy dress uniform stood scanning the crowd with the particular attention that never quite leaves people who've spent decades hunting threats. The uniform was pristine, ribbons covering his chest in neat rows. His posture was ramrod straight, despite what had to be at least 45 years of age. Kira's combat-trained brain cataloged details automatically. Height, 6'2". Build, maintain fitness despite age. Bearing, officer, senior rank. The way he scanned, methodical, grid pattern, exits in choke points. Then he turned slightly and she saw the scar above his right eye, the missing pinky finger on his left hand, the specific way he held his shoulders. Commander Garrett Hawthorne. The recognition hit like physical impact. 5 years collapsed into nothing. She was 23 again, in Kandahar, holding a dying soldier while mortars landed outside. She could hear his voice. "Block it out. Focus on the breath sounds." He hadn't seen her yet, was studying his phone, checking something. She watched him the way you watch ghosts, unsure if they're real or just memory made manifest. Her mother's voice pulled her back. "Honey, you look like you've seen something. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mom. Just thought I recognized someone." But she wasn't fine. Because seeing Hawthorne here, now, in this moment when her life was disintegrating, it felt like fate or coincidence or the universe playing cruel jokes. He was the last person from that life, the combat life, the life where she'd been competent and valued, and where the rules made sense. She made a decision without fully understanding why. "Mom, I need to check on something. I'll be right back." "Kira, 2 minutes, I promise." She stood, started walking toward Hawthorne, got within 20 feet before her courage failed. This was insane. He probably didn't even remember her. 5 years was a long time. He trained dozens of combat medics. She was just another specialist who'd rotated through Kandahar. She started to turn away, then stopped. Turned back, and without letting herself think about it anymore, without calculating consequences, she walked until she was 15 feet from him, stood straight, let her military bearing return, the posture that had been drilled into her through basic training and maintained through 2 deployments. She waited until he looked up from his phone. Their eyes met. She pressed 2 fingers to the radial pulse point on her left wrist, held the position for 3 seconds. The signal he'd taught her 5 years ago in a war zone. The distress call that meant, "I recognize you. I need help. I trust you." Hawthorne's entire body language shifted in an instant, relaxed to combat ready. His eyes focused with laser intensity. He moved toward her with the purposeful stride of someone responding to an emergency, covering the distance in seconds. "Identify yourself." His voice carried command authority that cut through all ambient noise. Kira's response came automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 military interactions. "Specialist Kira Brennan, Combat Support Hospital, Kandahar, January 2021 to December 2022, sir." Hawthorne's eyes narrowed, processing, searching memory. Then recognition dawned. Jesus Christ, Brennan, the medic who saved Hayes during the mortar attack. "Yes, sir." "What's the situation?" He glanced past her, tactical assessment, looking for threats. The words stuck in her throat. "How did you explain that you'd used a battlefield distress signal because your entire life was collapsing? That you'd seen someone from your past and grabbed at it like a drowning person grabs anything that floats?" "Sir, Her voice cracked. She steadied it. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used the signal. It wasn't appropriate." "Brennan." His voice softened slightly but remained firm. "That signal means something. You don't use it without reason. Talk to me." The professional walls she'd built crumbled. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was seeing someone who represented a time when she'd been good at her job, when the rules made sense. Maybe it was just that she had no one else. "I saved a patient's life 72 hours ago, sir. During surgery, the surgeon had missed a bleeder. Patient was coding. I reached across and clamped the vessel." The words came faster now. "Dr. Roland Ashford, chief of surgery. He filed assault charges. I'm suspended. Likely terminated." She pulled the encrypted drive from her pocket. "I have evidence he's been covering malpractice. 9 cases, 18 months. Mortality rate more than triple the hospital average. But I accessed records without authorization, so the evidence is inadmissible." Hawthorne's expression remained neutral, but she saw something shift behind his eyes. "My mother," Kira gestured toward the wheelchair 40 feet away. "Heart failure, needs surgery in Boston. I'm transporting her now. I've sold everything I own. Took a predatory loan. I'm 97,000 in student debt, and I have exactly 0 employment prospects." She stopped, realized she was rambling. "I'm sorry, sir, I shouldn't have bothered you with this. I just saw you and—" She touched 2 fingers to her wrist again, almost unconsciously. "I didn't know who else I could trust." Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a tactical decision. "The surgeon who reported you, Ashford, military background?" "Gulf War, sir. Combat surgeon, 1990 to 1991. Something flickered across Hawthorne's face. "I know Ashford, 1998. Joint SEAL Army Medical Training Operation at Fort Bragg. He was selected for advanced trauma certification. He didn't mention that in his file. Because he washed out, failed stress testing, couldn't maintain performance under high casualty simulation." Hawthorne's tone remained clinically neutral, but the information landed like ordnance. "It's not a judgment. Some people have different thresholds, but if he's covering mistakes now, that's consistent with someone who couldn't handle being wrong under pressure." Kira felt something loosen in her chest. Validation. From someone who understood both military medicine and the weight of evidence. "The hospital CEO, Hawthorne continued. "What's his name?" "Dr. Richard Caldwell. I'm speaking at his conference this morning, VA Healthcare Leadership Summit in Boston. He's moderating my panel on military-civilian medical integration." The coincidence was so absurd that Kira almost laughed. Almost. "Sir, he won't listen to me. I'm a suspended nurse with no credibility." "He might listen to evidence." Hawthorne held out his hand. "Give me the drive. Sir, if I share this, the hospital can sue me for $500,000. Breach of confidentiality, HIPAA violations. Give me the drive, specialist. Let me worry about the legal ramifications. She hesitated. This was the moment, the choice. Trust someone or handle it alone. She'd been handling things alone for so long. She placed the encrypted drive in his hand. Password? Kandahar Hayes, 2021, capital K and H. He pocketed the drive. What's your flight information? United 2847, departs 8:30. I'm on the same flight, different terminal, but I'll switch. We'll talk more in Boston. He paused. Why did you use the signal, Brennan? Real reason. She met his eyes. Because I'm out of options, sir. And because you told me once that it meant I wasn't alone. I needed to believe that was true. It is true. His voice carried absolute certainty. Get your mother on that plane. I'll see you in Boston. He turned and walked toward the airline desk, already pulling out his phone. Kira stood frozen for a moment, unable to quite process what had just happened. She'd used a combat signal in a civilian airport, and someone had actually answered. She returned to her mother's wheelchair. Maggie looked at her with concern. Everything okay? Yeah, Mom. Kira's voice was steadier than it had been in days. Everything's going to be okay. The flight to Boston was turbulent. Spring weather over the Rockies. The plane bucked and shuddered. Her mother dozed fitfully, oxygen mask in place. Kira couldn't sleep, kept replaying the airport encounter. Hawthorne's instant recognition of the signal. His knowledge of Ashford's background. The way he'd taken the encrypted drive without hesitation. She found herself wondering about Caldwell, the CEO who'd built St. Mary's into a profit machine. The administrator who'd signed off on her suspension without investigation. What kind of man was he? Would evidence matter to him? Or was Ashford too valuable, too important to the bottom line? At the Boston VA Hospital Conference Center, Dr. Richard Caldwell stood in a VIP lounge, reviewing his speaking notes. He was 58, distinguished in the way hospital CEOs cultivated. Silver hair, precisely cut, suit that probably cost more than most nurses made in a month, the posture of someone accustomed to authority. He'd been CEO of St. Mary's for 9 years, transformed it from a regional facility into a nationally ranked institution. The board loved him. Revenue up 43%, profit margins that made shareholders happy. He was good at his job, in the way that job was measured. His phone buzzed. Text from his son, Marcus. First contact in 2 weeks. Dad, that surgeon I reported? The one covering up malpractice? He's still operating, still hurting people. And I'm the one facing Article 15 for speaking up. This is what you taught me integrity looks like? Caldwell stared at the message. His son was an army physician in Germany. Good man, principled, sometimes too principled for his own good. The military didn't reward whistleblowers. Neither did hospitals. He started to type a response, stopped. What could he say? Keep your head down? Play politics? The same advice he'd given before that had fractured their relationship. He closed the phone without responding. Dr. Caldwell? A conference organizer approached. Your keynote speaker is here, Commander Hawthorne. Excellent. I'll greet him. He walked into the main lounge, saw Hawthorne immediately. Hard to miss a man in full dress uniform with that many ribbons. Navy Cross, 2 silver stars, multiple combat deployments. The kind of hero that medical conferences love to feature. Caldwell extended his hand. Commander Hawthorne, Richard Caldwell, honor to meet you. Hawthorne's grip was firm. His eyes were evaluating. Dr. Caldwell, thank you for the invitation. We're thrilled to have you speak on military-civilian healthcare collaboration. Your experience is invaluable. About that, Hawthorne's tone shifted slightly, professional but with an edge. Before the conference, I need to discuss something urgent. It concerns one of your staff members. Caldwell's smile faltered. I'm listening. What defines a good combat medic, in your view? The question seemed to come from nowhere. Caldwell processed it. I suppose quick decision-making under extreme pressure. Exactly. And in your hospital, what happens when a nurse demonstrates that quality? Silence stretched between them. I trained a combat medic in Afghanistan, Hawthorne continued. Specialist Kira Brennan. She saved 14 lives under direct enemy fire during a 72-hour siege. I recommended her for Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device. She received it. Caldwell felt something cold settle in his stomach. You know Nurse Brennan. I know she's currently suspended from your hospital for saving a patient's life during surgery. Commander, that's an ongoing personnel matter. It's a patient safety matter. Hawthorne placed a USB drive on the table between them. This contains evidence of systematic malpractice. 9 cases over 18 months, all involving your chief of surgery, Dr. Roland Ashford. Mortality and complication rates more than triple hospital averages. Caldwell stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. Dr. Ashford is a decorated Gulf War veteran, he said carefully. So am I. Hawthorne's voice remained level. Decoration doesn't equal infallibility. I served with Ashford in 1998, Joint Medical Training Operation. He failed stress protocols, couldn't maintain performance under high casualty scenarios. That's documented fact, not judgment. Caldwell's professional mask was cracking. I don't understand why you're bringing this to me. Because Kira Brennan used a battlefield distress signal this morning. That signal means, I need backup, life or death situation. In combat, ignoring that signal gets soldiers killed. Hawthorne leaned forward slightly. The patient she saved 3 days ago, Natalie Whitmore. Do you know that name? The name hit like ice water. The Whitmore Foundation family. Correct. The family that donated $6 million to your pediatric wing. Natalie Whitmore is alive because specialist Brennan saw what Dr. Ashford missed during surgery. A torn splenic artery. The OR video shows it clearly. Hawthorne pulled out a printed letter. The Whitmores sent a thank you note to your hospital 2 days ago. They asked to meet the nurse who saved their daughter. Your administration buried it. Caldwell took the letter with hands that had begun to tremble slightly. Read it. The words blurred together, but the meaning was crystalline. Gratitude for a nurse who'd acted quickly during surgery. Request for contact information to thank her personally. Assumption that the hospital would want to recognize such exemplary care. I wasn't aware of this letter, he said quietly, because your administrators buried it, the same way they buried other complaints about Ashford. Hawthorne stood. Dr. Caldwell, I've led special operations for 24 years. I learned one principle early. Leaders who protect image over truth lose both. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Your hospital culture punishes courage and rewards silence. That's how good people quit, and patients die unnecessarily. His voice carried no accusation, just statement of fact. So I'm asking you, what kind of leader are you? After Hawthorne left, Caldwell sat alone in the VIP lounge, opened his laptop, inserted the USB drive. The files loaded. Patient records, mortality statistics, surgical error patterns documented with meticulous precision. 9 cases, 18 months. Complications ranging from infections to hemorrhages to deaths. Dr. Roland Ashford's name appeared in every file. Complication rate, 4.1%. Hospital average, 1.2%. The data was buried in quarterly reports that Caldwell had signed without reading thoroughly. Statistical noise until you looked closely, until you saw the pattern. His phone buzzed again. Marcus. You taught me that integrity means doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything. I'm starting to think you've forgotten that. Caldwell closed his laptop, thought about his son reporting malpractice in Germany and facing retaliation. Thought about Kira Brennan saving a patient and getting suspended. Thought about the doctor he'd been 20 years ago, before administration, Before profit margins became more important than principles, he made a decision. Canceled his morning sessions, booked an immediate flight back to Denver, texted his assistant, schedule emergency board meeting, tomorrow morning, attendance mandatory, subject, Dr. Ashford's surgical outcomes. Prepare for full external audit. Then he sat in the airport lounge and did something he hadn't done in years. He questioned whether the system he'd built was actually serving patients or just serving itself. While Caldwell flew back to Denver, Kiera sat in a Boston hospital waiting room as her mother underwent pre-surgical evaluation. The cardiac specialist had been cautiously optimistic. The surgery could be scheduled within a week if they could secure the deposit. She'd maxed out the predatory loan, had exactly $0 remaining. But her mother was alive. That was enough for now. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Kira. Specialist Brennan. Commander Hawthorne, how's your mother?" "Stable. They're scheduling surgery." "Good. I spoke with Dr. Caldwell this morning. Gave him your evidence. He's flying back to Denver now. Emergency board meeting scheduled." Kira's breath caught. "Sir, what does that mean?" "It means your evidence is in play. What happens next depends on whether Caldwell has the spine to act on it." Hawthorne paused. "Brennan, you did everything right. The system failed you, not the other way around." "It doesn't feel that way." "It never does. But trust your training. You saved that patient. The evidence proves Ashford's pattern. Truth has a way of mattering, eventually." After the call ended, Kira sat in the waiting room and allowed herself a moment of something that felt dangerously close to hope. Back in Denver, Roland Ashford received word of the emergency board meeting through the hospital grapevine. He immediately understood what was happening. Caldwell had been compromised. Someone had gotten to him with Brennan's stolen data. Ashford made his own calls. Board members he'd cultivated over the years. Revenue arguments. Liability concerns if they pursued investigation. The implicit threat that he could take his practice to University Hospital and St. Mary's would lose $4.2 million in annual revenue. By midnight, the board was split. 4 members supporting Ashford, 3 demanding investigation. Caldwell held the deciding vote. The battle lines were drawn. Profit versus patient safety. Protection versus accountability. And somewhere between Boston and Denver, on flights crossing over the dark country, 2 versions of the future waited to collide. One where the system protected itself, and one where the signal had actually meant something. The emergency board meeting convened at St. Mary's Hospital at 7 o'clock on a gray Denver morning that threatened snow. 8 members sat around the polished mahogany table in the executive conference room. Dr. Richard Caldwell stood at the head, his silver hair immaculate, his suit pressed, his expression carrying none of the warmth that usually defined his public persona. Dr. Roland Ashford sat 3 seats down, his posture military straight, his face carved from stone. He'd spent the previous night on the phone, shoring up alliances, reminding board members of revenue numbers and donor relationships. He knew this game, had played it for 30 years. Thomas Whitmore sat at the far end of the table, the only non-medical board member present, pediatric wing donor, father of Natalie. He'd received a call from Caldwell at midnight asking him to attend. The request had been unusual enough that he'd agreed without knowing why. Caldwell opened a laptop, connected it to the room's projection system. The screen lit up with a single image, Kira Brennan's personnel file photo. Young face, steady eyes, the slight tan line you got from wearing combat gear in desert sun. "Gentlemen," Caldwell began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. "We're here to discuss the suspension of Specialist Kira Brennan and the surgical outcomes of Dr. Roland Ashford." Ashford's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. 3 days ago, Nurse Brennan was suspended following an incident during emergency surgery. Dr. Ashford filed a complaint alleging physical interference with a surgeon during a live procedure. That complaint characterized her actions as assault. Caldwell clicked to the next slide. This is the incident report filed by hospital administration. The text appeared. Clinical language. Brennan reached across sterile field without authorization. Patient endangered through nurse's reckless action. Immediate suspension warranted. However, Caldwell continued, I've since reviewed additional evidence that paints a substantially different picture. He clicked again. Video footage appeared. Operating room camera. Date stamped. Time coded. The board leaned forward. The video played without sound, but the visuals told the story. Ashford at the surgical table. Patient monitors visible in the frame. Blood pressure numbers dropping steadily. 90/60. 85/55. A nurse across the table, Brennan, identifiable even in surgical mask, pointing to something in the surgical field. Ashford shaking his head, continuing his work in a different area. The blood pressure kept falling, 80/50, 75/45. Then the monitors flatlined. The timestamp showed 35 seconds of flatline. 40, 50. Brennan reached across the table. Her hands moved with precise efficiency. A single clamp. The bleeding visible on camera stopped instantly. The blood pressure began climbing. 80/50, 90/60. Patient stabilized. Caldwell paused the video. This footage shows Specialist Brennan identifying a posterior splenic arterial bleed that Dr. Ashford missed. She attempted to alert him verbally. He dismissed her concern. The patient coded. After 55 seconds of cardiac arrest, Specialist Brennan clamped the bleeding vessel. The patient survived. The silence in the room was absolute. Our incident report credits Dr. Ashford with the save. The video tells a different story. Ashford stood abruptly. That video is out of context. The surgical field is complex. Split-second decisions. Roland, sit down. Caldwell's voice carried command authority that surprised even himself. I'm not finished. Ashford remained standing for 3 seconds, then sat slowly, his face flushed. Caldwell clicked to the next slide. Statistical data, charts and graphs. Over the past 18 months, Dr. Ashford has performed 37 major surgical procedures. 9 resulted in serious complications. 4 post-operative infections, 3 hemorrhages, 2 deaths. The numbers appeared beside hospital averages. The disparity was stark. His complication rate is 4.1%. The hospital average is 1.2%. The national average for procedures of comparable complexity is 1.3%. Caldwell let that sink in. Dr. Ashford's complication rate is more than triple what we should expect from a surgeon of his experience. Board member Harrison, the hospital's financial director, spoke up. Richard, I appreciate the concern, but statistically we're talking about 9 cases out of 37. That's still an 80% success rate. 9 preventable complications, Caldwell corrected. 9 patients who suffered unnecessarily. 2 who died. And a pattern that suggests systemic issues with surgical technique or decision-making. Ashford found his voice. I've been performing surgery for 40 years. I've saved thousands of lives. My record speaks for itself. Your record is why we're here. Caldwell clicked to another slide. Military service history. You're a decorated Gulf War veteran, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Your service is honorable and respected. But I've learned something about your military medical training that wasn't in your hospital file. Ashford's face went pale. In 1998, you were selected for Joint SEAL Army Advanced Trauma Certification at Fort Bragg. You washed out after failing stress protocols. The evaluation noted difficulty maintaining performance under high casualty scenarios and challenges accepting correction from junior medical personnel. That was 26 years ago, and yet the pattern persists. Caldwell's voice remained level but implacable. The evidence suggests that when surgical complications arise, you struggle to adapt quickly and dismiss input from nursing staff who might identify problems you've missed. Thomas Whitmore raised his hand slightly. Excuse me, Richard. You mentioned my daughter by name in your message last night. How does she factor into this? Caldwell turned to face him directly. Mr. Whitmore, your daughter Natalie was the patient in that video, the one specialist Brennan saved. Whitmore went absolutely still. Dr. Ashford missed the arterial bleed. Specialist Brennan identified it. He dismissed her concern. Your daughter coded on the table. She's alive because Nurse Brennan violated protocol to clamp that vessel. Whitmore stood slowly, walked to the projection screen, studied the frozen image of his daughter on the surgical table. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the particular fury of a parent who's just learned their child nearly died unnecessarily. My daughter told me a nurse saved her life during surgery. She was quite specific about it, said the nurse reached across and did something the doctor hadn't seen. I assume she was confused from anesthesia. He turned to face Ashford. She wasn't confused, was she? Ashford said nothing. My family donated $6 million to this hospital because we believe in its mission. We sent a letter 2 days ago asking to meet the nurse who saved Natalie, to thank her personally. We never received a response. Whitmore's gaze swept the room. Instead, you suspended her. You falsified the incident report, and you would have terminated her and destroyed her career to protect him. Board member Harrison tried to intervene. Tom, I understand you're upset, but we need to consider. Consider what? Revenue? Whitmore's voice rose. Dr. Ashford generates $4 million annually, I'm aware. My family's donations have totaled $12 million over 8 years. So let's talk about numbers, shall we? If you terminate the nurse who saved my daughter to protect the surgeon who nearly killed her, the Whitmore Foundation withdraws all current and future support. Immediately. The financial calculus in the room shifted visibly. Caldwell seized the moment. I'm recommending Dr. Ashford's immediate suspension pending full external audit by an independent medical review board. All of his surgical cases over the past 24 months. Complete transparency. State medical board notification. Richard, that's extreme, Harrison began. Extreme is letting a surgeon with triple the expected complication rate continue operating while we protect institutional reputation. Caldwell's voice cut like surgical steel. I became a doctor to save lives. Somewhere along the way, I became an administrator who protected systems instead of patients. That ends today. He looked at Ashford directly. Roland, you're a talented surgeon, but the evidence is undeniable. You're suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. You'll be allowed to collect personal items under supervision. Ashford stood slowly. His face had gone from flushed to ashen. Richard, you're making the biggest mistake of your career. I'll take my practice to University Hospital. Your profit margins will collapse. The board will remove you within 6 months. Maybe, Caldwell's voice was steady, but I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Will you? Ashford walked to the door, stopped, turned back. This hospital was built on the backs of surgeons like me, decorated veterans who came home and dedicated our lives to medicine. You're destroying that legacy over one nurse's insubordination. No, the voice came from Whitmore. He's protecting that legacy. Because the legacy isn't about protecting bad doctors. It's about protecting patients, even when it costs everything. Ashford left without another word. Security met him in the hallway. The board took a formal vote 30 minutes later. Motion to suspend Ashford pending investigation. 6 votes in favor, 2 opposed. Motion to reinstate Kira Brennan with full back pay and expungement of disciplinary record. 7-1, with Harrison abstaining. Motion to authorize external audit. Unanimous. Caldwell sat alone in the conference room after the others left. He pulled out his phone, composed a text to his son Marcus. You were right. I'd forgotten what integrity looks like. I'm trying to remember now. The response came within minutes. Proud of you, Dad. 2 weeks later, the Independent Medical Review Board delivered its findings. 11 cases of surgical complications in Ashford's recent history, the original 9 Kiera had documented, plus 2 additional cases the audit uncovered, that showed patterns consistent with poor sterile technique, inadequate preoperative planning, and failure to respond appropriately when complications arose. 4 cases where he'd operated while potentially impaired, confirmed through staff testimony given under immunity. Systematic dismissal of nursing staff concerns that preceded multiple negative outcomes. Recommendation: immediate license suspension, mandatory reporting to state medical board, termination from hospital employment. The findings were unambiguous. Street. Mary's released a public statement acknowledging systematic failures in surgical oversight and announcing comprehensive reforms to patient safety protocols. The Denver Post ran the story on page 3. Decorated surgeon suspended after patient safety investigation. The article was factual, clinical, and devastating. Roland Ashford's 40-year career ended not with violence or drama, but with bureaucratic precision. In Boston, Kiera Brennan received a phone call at 6 in the morning. She'd spent the previous night in the hospital chapel while her mother underwent valve replacement surgery. 8 hours on the table. Touch and go at 3 points. But the surgeon, a specialist with national reputation, had pulled her through. "Miss Brennan?" The voice on the phone was unfamiliar. Professional. "This is Janet Morrison from St. Mary's Hospital Administration. Dr. Caldwell asked me to contact you directly." Kiera braced herself for more legal threats, more demands for silence. "I'm listening." "The board has voted to reinstate you effective immediately. Full back pay for the suspension period. Your disciplinary record has been expunged. Dr. Caldwell would like to discuss your return and some additional opportunities." The words didn't make sense at first. Kiera's exhausted brain couldn't process them. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Morrison repeated it, added details, formal apology from the hospital, settlement offer that included elimination of her student debt, $97,000 paid in full, promotion to senior emergency nurse with corresponding salary increase to $58,000 annually, and something else, something that made even less sense. Dr. Caldwell is creating a new position, Director of Emergency Medical Education and Veteran Integration. He's asked if you'd be interested in interviewing for it. After the call ended, Kiera sat in the chapel for 20 minutes, trying to understand how her life had inverted itself so completely in 2 weeks. From suspended and bankrupt to reinstated and debt-free. From unemployable to being offered a director position. Her phone rang again. Hawthorne. "Specialist Brennan, I heard from Caldwell. Congratulations." "Sir, I don't understand what happened. How did this—" "You used the signal." Someone answered. "The system worked, for once." His voice carried something that might have been satisfaction. "You did everything right. The evidence was solid. Caldwell had the integrity to act on it. That's what happens when the pieces align. But the board, the investigation, all of it, wasn't about you. Was about whether St. Mary's would choose profit or patience. They chose patience, partly because of Whitmore's threat to pull funding, partly because Caldwell remembered who he used to be, partly because your evidence was undeniable." Hawthorne paused. "But mostly because you were right, and you trusted your training enough to act even when it cost everything." "I could have lost my license, my career." "Yes, that's what courage costs sometimes. The willingness to be right even when everyone says you're wrong." After that call, Kiera walked to her mother's recovery room. Maggie was awake, groggy from anesthesia, but alive. The monitors showed strong, vital signs. The surgeon had been cautiously optimistic about long-term prognosis. "Hey, Mom." Maggie's eyes focused slowly. "Kiera, is everything—" "Everything's fine. Surgery went perfectly. You're going to be okay." "And you? Your job?" Kiera smiled. Actually smiled, for the first time in what felt like years. I got my job back, Mom, with a promotion, and they paid off my student loans. Maggie started crying. Kira did too. They sat like that for a long time, mother and daughter, survivors of different wars, holding each other while machines beeped steady confirmation that hearts were still beating. 6 months later, St. Mary's Hospital looked almost identical from the outside. Same glass and steel architecture, same prestigious reputation. But inside, the culture had shifted in ways both profound and subtle. The Patient Safety Oversight Committee met monthly. 3 nurses, 2 physicians, 2 administrators. Voting power distributed equally. Any staff member could report concerns anonymously through a secure system, with mandatory investigation and whistleblower protection backed by board resolution. The Ashford Protocol, as it became known, required immediate peer review for any surgeon whose complication rate exceeded twice the hospital average. No exceptions based on seniority or revenue generation. Patient safety metrics were now tied to executive compensation. The incentives had fundamentally changed. Staff turnover dropped from 38% to 14%. Nurse satisfaction scores ranked second in Colorado. Patient safety incidents declined 31%, and paradoxically, revenue increased 8% as reputation improved and malpractice insurance costs decreased. In Pittsburgh, Margaret Brennan returned to part-time work at the factory. Her heart was strong. The valve replacement had bought her decades, the surgeon said. She called Kira every Sunday morning, their ritual, talked about neighbors, about the weather, about how proud she was. "You saved my life, honey," Maggie said during one of those calls. "The surgeons saved your life, Mom." "No, you did. When you refused to give up, when you fought the system even when it was destroying you." A pause. That's what mothers dream of, that their daughters grow up strong enough to fight for what's right. Kira had cried after that call. Good tears, the kind that meant healing. Kira Brennan stood in the new training facility on a Tuesday morning, facing 18 rookie nurses beginning orientation. She wore scrubs that actually fit, new ones, and her medical bag had been replaced with hospital-issued equipment, but she'd kept the old bag in her office. Reminder of where she'd come from. "My name is Kira Brennan," she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd survived their worst fears and come out stronger. 18 months ago, I was sitting where you are, new nurse, terrified of making mistakes, desperate to prove myself. The rookies watched her with the attention of people who recognized themselves in her words. 15 months ago, I was suspended from this hospital for saving a patient's life. That got their full attention. I violated protocol, reached across a sterile field during surgery, clamped a bleeding vessel without surgeon authorization. The patient was coding. I had maybe 10 seconds before brain damage became permanent. I chose to act. She paused. Let them process it. I was right. The patient lived. But I was suspended anyway because the system prioritized rules over outcomes. I could have lost my license, my career, everything. She clicked to the next slide. Combat footage from Kandahar. Grainy video from a helmet camera. Explosions. Chaos. Medics working under fire. I learned medicine in Afghanistan. Combat zones where you make life or death decisions in seconds. No time for paperwork. No committees. Just training and instinct and the understanding that hesitation kills people. Another slide. The signal. 2 fingers to radial pulse point. This gesture saved my life. It's a battlefield distress call. Means, I need backup. Life-threatening situation. I trust you. I used it in an airport when my career was destroyed. My mother was dying, and I was out of options. Someone answered. Someone helped me get the evidence to the right person. And the system changed. She looked at each face in the room. You'll face moments where doing the right thing costs everything. Where everyone with authority says, you're wrong. Where the choice is between following rules and saving lives. In those moments, you need to know, you're not alone. You have backup. You have each other. And you have this signal. She demonstrated it again. If you need help, if you see something wrong and no one's listening, if you're being retaliated against for speaking up, use this. Find someone you trust. Use the signal. We're building a culture where courage is valued, not punished, where patient safety matters more than protecting egos or revenue streams. The rookies sat in silence, processing. Some took photos of the signal slide. Others practiced the gesture quietly, 2 fingers to wrist. Kira watched them and saw herself 5 years ago. Scared, determined, believing that medicine could save the world if you worked hard enough. "Any questions?" she asked. No hands went up, but she saw understanding in their eyes. They'd remember this. When the moment came, they'd remember. 3 weeks passed. The new cohort settled into their rotations. Kira saw them in hallways, in break rooms, practicing procedures under supervision. Some thrived, others struggled. All of them were learning. She'd given the signal presentation 4 times now. Each group responded differently, but they all understood the core message: you're not alone. On a Thursday night in late September, Kira worked an ER shift. The work had become familiar again, comfortable in the way that challenging things become comfortable through repetition. But she never forgot how close she'd come to losing it. At 1:40 in the morning, a mass casualty alert came through. Multi-vehicle accident on I-25. 9 patients incoming, 4 critical. All hands on deck. Trauma Bay 2 received a young soldier, 23 years old, Fort Carson, on leave, visiting family. Wrong place, wrong time. Tension, pneumothorax, collapsed lung, BP crashing. Kira moved with practiced efficiency, recognized the injury pattern instantly. Kandahar all over again. She prepped for needle decompression while a rookie nurse named Brianna stood frozen at the equipment cart, overwhelmed by the blood and alarms and chaos. "Brianna," Kira's voice cut through the noise. "Look at me." The young nurse's eyes were wide with terror. "What does your training tell you?" I can't." 2 fingers, wrist, "Show me the signal." Brianna's hands trembled, but she made the gesture. 2 fingers to pulse point. "I see you. I've got you. Now tell me what we do." Brianna's voice shook, but the words came. 14-gauge catheter, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. "Then do it. I'm right here." Brianna's hands moved, slow at first, then sure. Found the landmarks, inserted the catheter. The hiss of escaping air sounded like salvation. The soldier's oxygen saturation climbed. 84%, 89, 94. After the crisis passed, Brianna collapsed against the wall, adrenaline dump making her shake. Kira handed her a bottle of water. "You just saved his life." I was terrified. So was I. Every single time in Kandahar, every time here, that never goes away. Kira touched Brianna's shoulder. "But neither does the training, and neither do we. We show up for each other." 1 year after Ashford's termination, on a March morning that felt like both ending and beginning, Kira stood on the hospital roof during a break. The helicopter pad stretched out before her, empty for the moment. The Denver skyline cut sharp angles against a clear blue sky. She touched 2 fingers to her wrist. The gesture had become habit now, muscle memory, reminder. "Still can't sleep?" Commander Hawthorne's voice came from behind her. She turned. He'd flown in for quarterly consulting on the Veteran Integration Program. Unpaid volunteer work he did because it mattered. Just thinking about how different things could have been. Hawthorne joined her at the railing. "You're thinking about the patients Ashford hurt, the ones before you stopped him. How many others are out there? In other hospitals. Surgeons covering mistakes, nurses too afraid to speak up. That's not your burden to carry alone." His voice was gentle but firm. "You built a system. Systems outlast individuals. Every nurse you train, every life they save, that's your legacy multiplying." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Hawthorne pulled something from his pocket, a small box. "I meant to give you this months ago." Inside was a pin, seal trident insignia, engraved on the back, "For Specialist Kira Brennan, Courage Under Fire, 2021 and 2026. Kira's vision blurred with tears. "You earned this twice," Hawthorne said. "Once in Kandahar, once here, different battlefields, same courage." Behind them, the rooftop door opened. Brianna emerged, followed by 3 other rookie nurses from the training program. Then more. Senior staff, physicians, administrators, 20 people gathering on the roof without being asked. They stood together in the morning light, and one by one, they touched 2 fingers to their wrists. The signal, the promise, you are not alone. Kira looked at them and understood something fundamental. She hadn't saved herself by being right. She'd saved herself by trusting someone else to help, by using a signal that meant, "I need backup." And the answer had changed everything. The hospital had transformed, not because one person was brave, but because that bravery had given others permission to be brave too. Because systems changed when enough people refused to accept broken ones. The sun climbed higher over Denver. Helicopters would come and go. Patients would arrive in crisis and leave healed, or wouldn't leave at all. The work would continue, hard and endless and necessary, but the people doing that work would know they weren't alone. That backup existed. That courage was valued, not punished. That when you signaled for help, someone, somewhere, would always answer. In a hospital room 3 floors below, a patient opened their eyes after surgery, alive because someone had trusted their training enough to act when it mattered most. Kira's phone buzzed. Text from her mother in Pittsburgh. "Feeling strong today, just wanted you to know. Love you, honey." She smiled, typed back, "Love you too, Mom." The sun climbed higher. The work continued. The signal endured, and so did hope.